A villain often thinks that they're the hero in the story. I think of the movie series, The Avengers, that's come out recently, and how Thanos comes along and is the mega villain at the very end of the story. And every time he talks and they pan in for a monologue, he always talks about doing what's necessary, about needing to cleanse the earth of half the people because there's a lack of resources and someone has to do it. And in our hearts, we know this is evil and wrong, and yet at the same time, if he talks long enough, you can see the conviction in his voice. The villain often thinks that they're the hero in the story. This last month, we've been talking about the monsters of the Bible. We've talked about Goliath, and we've talked about Leviathan and Behemoth. We've talked about these extra normal, strange, large, powerful villains, and about how God shows up and how God helps when things seem too big or scary. But today I want to end and think about it in a different sort of way. I want to talk about a character who starts out so well, who gets it right until they don't, and see if we can find ourselves in the story. First of all, I want to tell you a story about a time that I thought I was the hero, but it turned out I was a villain. I had been married for a very short time, and my wife loved watching TV shows that she could get into, and I didn't really watch TV all that much. If I watched TV, it might be a syndicated show on TBS or something like that. And so shortly after we got married, a show came on Fox called The OC. You may or may not have heard it. It was kind of a big deal at the time. And Charisse loved this show, and she would tell me about it, and so I thought, you know what, a good husband thing to do will be to watch the show with her and try to get into it. And I did. I watched it with her. I got caught up to where she was, and I watched it with her. And it went on and off the air, and a few years later, it was Christmas time, and we were young, and we didn't have very much money. And so I was always trying to find a thoughtful and kind gift for her without the very much money that we had. And I was walking through Target and I saw on sale the entire box set of The OC in DVD format. If you're under the age of 20, ask someone what DVD means. They'll explain it to you. And I thought, that's wonderful. Charisse loved that show. And so I bought the entire series, and I was so excited. I wrapped it up nice, and Christmas came, and she opened it, and I was so excited. I thought, this was meaningful. She'll appreciate the kindness, the thoughtfulness. This was like the first show I'd ever watched on TV from beginning to end, and I did it because of her, with her, for her. She loved the show. She looked forward to it every week. And she opened up the gift and looked at the box set of The OC, and this was her reaction. Are you ready for it? Oh. Now, I don't know if you've ever bought someone a gift that you thought was meaningful before. You get in your mind in the weeks leading up to unwrapping what you think that reaction's going to be. And to be fair, you should not buy a gift for someone so that you can enjoy their reaction. You should buy a gift for someone because they'll like it, right? But I was really excited. And what I got was, oh, no other comment, put it back, unwrap the next thing. And so I spent the rest of Christmas morning thinking, what was that all about? And so later in the day, she was showing me what she got from her parents, my parents. I was like, that's great. What did you think of the OC box set? And she goes, yeah, I mean, I've already watched the show. Oh, I'm here to tell you to this day, we've been married for 22 years. She has not pulled the plastic off of the OC box set that I got her. I thought I was getting something meaningful and excited, and quickly I learned that I wasted my time, my money, my energy, and she thought, well, I thought I was thoughtful. She thought I was ridiculous. Have you ever been in this sort of situation before when you thought you nailed it? Could be gift giving, could be otherwise. You thought you nailed it. You gave the right answer. You stood up and gave a speech in class. You handed in a math test. You gave a presentation to your boss. Have you ever thought you nailed it, only to be told that you got it all wrong? That is the text that we're going to look at today. The story is in Matthew chapter 16, and it's verses 13 to 28. It is a story of Peter and Jesus. And Jesus trying to get at the root of what's the conversation about there about what's going on. What are people talking about when it comes to me? And here Peter is going to be the one to stand up and straighten his dress coat, arch his back straight and say, well, I've got the answer to this. But it turns quickly on Peter. I'd invite you, if you would, to stand with me as we read the story of Peter and Jesus today in Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 28. Starting with verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Well, we're halfway through, but Peter's doing pretty good. Verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hand of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly, I tell you, some of you are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. So what's the chatter out there? What are people saying? What are you hearing? When you walk the streets and see your friends from high school or associates or coworkers, what are they saying? Well, the word on the street is that you might be John the Baptist. Well, someone else said Elijah. Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are saying Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. Here's the thing, those are pretty good guesses. Those are pretty good guesses. The people walking the streets, buddying up to the disciples, sharing their theories about what Jesus is about and who he is, those are pretty good guesses. Think about it. The very next chapter is the Transfiguration, where three of the disciples go up on the mountain with Jesus, and what they see there is Jesus transfigured, and Elijah shows up. So Elijah is tight, is close, And then Jesus says that John the Baptist was Elijah. And so that's pretty similar. A couple chapters from now, Jesus will walk into the temple and he will cleanse it. He'll flip tables over and he'll quote Jeremiah. Literally, Jeremiah will be the words that come out of his mouth when he says, this was meant to be a house of prayer, but you've turned it into a den of robbers. Jesus talks like the prophets did. And anyone walking the streets of Israel would have studied their prophets and would have heard the similarities in diction and tone and language and quotation between Jesus and the prophets. It's not surprising that people are saying, man, he sounds like the prophets of yesteryear. But as good as those guesses are, they're not right. They're not the correct answer. Jesus is not Jeremiah. He's not Elijah. He's not John the Baptist. Any of the disciples saw John the Baptist at the same time as Jesus. See, Jesus is something else. And so Jesus says, all right, well, who do you say I am? Let's cut straight to the core. I'm not interested in what your friend from elementary school said. Who do you say I am? And Peter answers correctly. He says, you are the Messiah. You're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. And Peter is correct. He's very correct. He is right on. And Jesus congratulates him and celebrates him for being right on. So much so that Jesus then will go on to really compliment him. His ability to see through all of the gossip and the story and the possibilities. Jesus says, there's no chance you've come up with that except that God himself has revealed it to you. And so, here are the keys to the kingdom. You are the rock on which I will build my church. This is not got an A+ on the math test. This is the most important question any of us will ever face in our life. And Peter aced it to the 10th degree. He is the front of the class. He has shown us, he has taught us the correct answer. When we come face to face with Jesus, the question we will be asked is, who am I? And we're taught here to say, you are the Messiah. You are God's chosen. This is the most important question we will ever answer. And Peter has nailed it. You see this picture, this art here of Jesus handing the keys of the kingdom to Peter. Now, this text is the reason that some of the jokes and the stories and the things we've heard, some of the histories and traditions are what they are. This text is the reason the Catholic Church believes that Peter was the first pope. But then also, you know all of those jokes about how you're going to die and see St. Peter at the pearly gates? Have you heard those jokes before? That also comes from this text because he's the one who apparently has the keys to get in. And so if he's the one who has the keys to get in, there you get the jokes about seeing St. Peter at the pearly gates. I've got a little cartoon here for you. It doesn't appear that we, as though we have a Carl Lepton in here. Wife says, hang on, I have a 2-for-1 coupon in here somewhere. I can promise you that's not how it works. Good try though. This is where we get our St. Peter is waiting at the pearly gates because he seems to have some sort of authority as to who gets in and who gets out. Now, the jokes aren't theologically correct, but this is where it comes from. But as much as we can talk about Peter, and we will talk about Peter again just one moment, I want to dig into a moment in the text that I think is pretty easy to just pass by, especially 2,000 years later. And that's where all of this takes place. Because it seems as though Jesus has created an object lesson on purpose to have this conversation. He brings his disciples to a town called Caesarea Philippi. And Caesarea Philippi is about 20 miles away from Galilee. It's a town outside of Israel named after Caesar and Herod Philip, a Jewish leader, who has reestablished this town. They have invested money into this place and are trying to make it a viable place. And they're doing so because it is an important pagan worship center. Because there is this cave here. And this cave was believed in pagan worship to be the place in which the fertility gods would go down into the underworld during the winter. So they would go away in the winter and then come back up through that cave, that tunnel, that hole in the spring. And the name of it was the gates of Hades, or the gates of hell. And so Peter is brought, along with Jesus, to this town which no self-respecting, holy, good Jew would be found in, because this was the center of pagan worship. Deplorable, despicable things happened in this place. This would be very similar to like a church deciding that they were going to meet on a Sunday morning in Amsterdam's red light district. It doesn't make sense. And so these young disciples are probably following Jesus saying, what are we doing here? You're not going to tell our parents on us, are you? This is not where we belong. And they come up to this place to have an object lesson. Who do you say I am? Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, yes. And even the gates of hell cannot stand up against that. Peter does so well here. He's spot on. He gets it right. Everything about the last 3 years of his life has culminated in this moment, and he is the hero. He done so well until he doesn't. Things turn really quick. You see, Jesus had been teaching for so long, and Peter had heard most of it. Peter has his facts straight. Peter has understood who Jesus is in a factual, intellectual manner. He can ace the test, but doesn't seem able to put it to practice. You see, Jesus knew all along that to be the Messiah, to be the Son of God, meant that he was headed towards the cross. But Peter didn't understand that. And there is some irony to that, because it's talked about in the Old Testament in a way that Jesus embodied and embraced and understood. But Peter didn't. There's this text in Isaiah 52 and 53 that's been very, very helpful and descriptive for us Christians. But most Jews didn't read it in the way that Jesus did and the way that we do today. And I want to read just some of this language because it describes the sort of suffering and crucifixion that Jesus is heading towards. And it's very easy to read it in retrospect. But this is language that Peter was aware of, that he was unwilling or unable to accept when Jesus was teaching. He should have been able to say, oh, I hear what you're saying, Jesus. You're going to suffer many things, and you're going to deny yourself. You're going to take up your cross. You will be killed and then raised to 3 days. Okay, I heard about that in Isaiah. But Peter can't make the leap, even though that Jesus knows the text. I'm going to read just a few verses from chapter 53 of Isaiah here. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of all of us. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. And as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and he and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. This is a bit more poetic, but the language is very similar in the straightforward thing that Jesus is saying to Peter in this text. I have to go and suffer many things. I will be killed, but I'll be raised to life in 3 days. Peter is unable to make the connection, to remember stories like this for the Old Testament and understand what might be the call of the Messiah in today's world. But Peter was not alone, because no one in Israel had ever heard of a crucified Messiah. No one in Israel was waiting for a Messiah that would come and die on their behalf. But Jesus understood his call. And in order to shape the minds, even of his disciples, he needed to tell them, to talk about it, to share with them, to prepare them, to teach them. Because your average everyday Peter was not ready for a Messiah to die on their behalf. But the texts in the Old Testament do teach us that there's something about a servant of God who will die on the behalf of the sins of God's people. And so Jesus understands this to be the call and the vocation of the Messiah. He is prepared and is preparing himself for that. And when he explains this to Peter, who out of one side of his mouth understands who he is, Peter begins to speak out of the other side of his mouth. Because if Peter believes that he is the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God, it seems that he should trust the next thing that's going to come out of Jesus' mouth. If Peter believes he's the Son of God, then he believes that he is doing God's will. And so Jesus says, I'm going to die. And Peter says, oh, no, you won't. Over my and all of our dead bodies, let's go. And Jesus says, whoa. I thought you said I was the Messiah. I thought you testified that I was the Christ. I thought you knew who I was, and now I'm teaching you what I'm about. And Peter said, essentially, sir, I know better than you. Yes, you are the Messiah, absolutely. But we're going to do things my way now. I've been polishing up my sword. Me and my boys have been going to lessons. If you're the Son of God, there's no way we can lose a war, right? Let's do this. And Peter is told by Jesus some of the most shocking language in all of the New Testament. Jesus turns to Peter and says, get behind me, Satan. Now, I don't know about you, but I get like goosebumps when I read and I think about that. Calling someone Satan is a pretty harsh vibe. That's a pretty rough accusation. Get behind me, Satan. Just a minute ago, I was your star pupil. Just a minute ago, I had it all right. Just a minute ago, my theology, my beliefs, everything was spot on. And just like that, you can call me Satan? Put on Peter's shoes for a minute. This has got to be confusing and unsettling, to say the least. The man you have just confessed is the Lord is now saying that you are essentially Satan. And so in this series, I've been talking about what God does when we face monsters. But today I want to ask a different question. I want to ask you this question. What happens when we become the monster? Because in this text, Peter is likened to a character that we would often call a monster, Satan himself. Because here, Peter is ready to sin on behalf of his statement of theology. He's ready to become violent. He's ready to become vindictive. The rules are thrown out for Peter now. And so it seems to me that one of the best ways to think about this text from a personal point of view is to say to myself, to remind myself, to hear God speak and to say that confessing who Jesus is correctly does not mean our next action is going to be holy. We can all run around and shout at the top of our lungs that Jesus is the Messiah. But that doesn't shape our heart into the heart of Jesus. We can say over and over and over that Jesus is Lord, but that doesn't make our dispositions or our life Christian. Something that concerns me deeply about modern Christians today is there seems to be this belief that has taken hold within us that thinks that if we confess that Jesus is Lord, it baptizes all my behaviors. I can do what I want because I am on the right team. But Jesus calls that out straight away in this text. Peter got the answer correct. He testified correctly as to who Jesus was. But that didn't get him away from being called Satan. And so if there's anything that this text invites us to think about is that we need to strive for more than just simply knowing who Jesus is. Knowing who Jesus is isn't the same as knowing Jesus. Knowing who Jesus is isn't the same as inviting Jesus to be Lord. When Jesus is Lord, that means he's Lord over my behaviors, my beliefs, my money, my ethics, my marriage, my parenting, my school, my friendships, my time. To say Jesus is Lord means Jesus is Lord of all. And so when Peter gets the answer correctly, it should influence the next act. It should be that when Jesus speaks and says something that doesn't make sense to him, Peter's response should be, whoa, tell me more. You're going to have to help me understand that. Because the ways of God are so different than our fallen world, it doesn't always make sense when Jesus speaks. Because our imagination, our thought processes, our way of life has fallen with the world. And so when Jesus pipes up and speaks, it doesn't always make sense, and that's okay. The correct answer, the next right answer after Peter confesses Jesus as Lord would have been to say, I don't get that at all. Help me understand what you're about. Help me understand why you're saying this. Help me understand so I can get in alignment with you, Jesus. But all too often, our response matches that of Peter. No, Jesus, that doesn't make any sense. I'd rather fight. I'd rather do battle. I'd rather sin and keep my perspective than to submit to what you're saying and learn your heart. Jesus has an antidote for this behavior. He has a particular call that he ends this text with. An invitation to Peter, who on one breath he says is right, and the next breath he says he's Satan. There's an invitation to come and to understand Jesus. And this is what Jesus' antidote is. If any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. What happens when we're the monster? What happens when we're the one that Jesus is saying is like Satan? What happens when we're more colored by the world, by our sin, by the way things work here, that Jesus doesn't even make sense to us anymore? What do we do then? Well, the answer is the cross. The answer is always the cross. Jesus bears our sin and our iniquity for us, that we can be made new in a way we don't deserve and we haven't earned. But he doesn't just simply say, I do this for you. He does say that. But he invites us to try on that call for ourselves, to follow him to Golgotha, to pick up the heavy splintered wood of the cross and carry it on our back for a while, to come and die to our old perspectives and way of life, and to find that God is always faithful to say yes to those who say, Jesus is Messiah. I'll follow him to the cross. And we know that what God says to Jesus is yes. Jesus dies sacrificially on the cross for our sin. He's placed in a grave and is raised 3 days later. And if we're willing to take up our cross, to say no to sin, to say no to our perspectives, to say no to our way of doing things, God is a God of resurrection 3 days later, every single time. So if there's any part of you today wrestling with whether or not you are capable of being the monster, if there's any chance that Jesus might look upon you and say, oh, there's a lot of Satan happening here, know that the antidote is very simple. The answer is the cross. It's been accomplished for you already. You must simply follow Jesus, and you'll find he'll give you a new life, make you new, forgive you, and set you free. If you've never said yes to Jesus, if you've never come to the cross, if you've never confronted the sin in your life, don't let today go without you taking the chance to come and pray and asking that God would forgive you, set you free, and make you new. There's no amount of monstrous behavior, nothing that you have committed that won't be forgiven by the blood of Jesus given for us on the cross. So we're going to sing a final song today, and I invite you to stand with me. And as we sing, please say yes to Jesus if he's speaking to you.